John, we're here on the family farm, your family farm, which is absolutely stunning. What was it like growing up here?
Isolated. We went to town probably only once a month. You know, most of the staples were home produced.
Yep.
But there was a much closer local community, so every weekend would be a tennis party or whatever. And half the district seemed to migrate to the same beach at summertime. But it was pretty isolated day by day.
How many generations, how long has the farm existed in your family?
My family have been in this part of New South Wales now since the 1840s. They moved not far from here about 115 years ago to here. So my grandson is now the 5th on this place.
Wow. So 1840, that's pretty early. What brought them here?
Very early. One side of the family came here from Devon in England, 3 brothers, and one of them managed to shoot one of the others, but it was a genuine accident. So then there were 2, and I think they were looking for opportunity. The Anderson side were doctors, Glasgow educated doctors, and they came out here looking, I think, for opportunity for their children and grandchildren. They were looking much further ahead. That's what they did in those days. We're not much good at that now. When we talk about hope for the future, I think we probably mean a good time tonight.
Yeah, it's a remarkable decision, isn't it? I mean, it's
Incredible.
halfway around the world, 6 months on a boat.
Risky on the boat.
Yeah.
Risky when you get here. And in fact, my forebear, Anderson, who was a Glasgow educated doctor, died of appendicitis. And there was no one to operate. They probably could have operated in those days if there'd been someone else there. But he wasn't able to. He died, leaving his widow with 5 children in the Australian bush.
Wow.
She actually had 7, but 2 had died at a boarding school down in the Hunter Valley at Morpeth, somewhere down there. And they wouldn't have got the letter until 2 or 3 weeks after the children were buried.
Goodness.
There wasn't even a railway, let alone
Wow.
a telegraph. So they're out there in the middle of nowhere, and yet they carved out a civilised life for themselves quite quickly for all of that.
John, people know you as a person of faith now. If we met you as a young boy, year 7, year 8, what was faith for you then?
Oh, look, a vague belief in an impersonal God. Certainly a belief he was there, but no knowledge worth mentioning, and no concept of a personal relationship.
So that wasn't part of your family life?
No, it wasn't.
So what
We
changed?
belong to an old sort of, the Presbyterian Scottish sort of tradition where my mother died when I was very young, and we had a series of governesses, and my father used to, I suppose, out of some respect for family tradition, insist that we'd say our prayers before we went to bed at night. That was the extent of it.
What changed?
Oh, look, in my teenage years, we had a terrible accident here on the farm, and I grew up overnight. I sort of lost my innocence and my childhood. And I wanted to understand why, how do I make sense of this, and is there hope? Is there, some way of overcoming the pain? So for me, it was an experience of first hearing a school chaplain talking about a God who cared and loved and could be loved in response. And I was pretty angry and unimpressed with that idea, because I had this notion that if there was a God, he couldn't know us individually. We're all just a whole lot of ants running around on the surface of the earth. I didn't go to talk to him about it. I went to talk to my then commerce teacher, who seemed to believe all this funny stuff. And I thought he was old and wise and experienced. When I look back on it, I do the maths, he was 27. But, he, in a sense, led me to personal faith.
Yeah. So what difference did it make, John?
I think anyone who's undergone a real experience of conversion, it is life-changing. You're never the same again, because you understand for the first time that God is intensely personal, and he becomes very real. Doesn't mean to say you don't kick over the traces, because I did, and slipped away from it, probably reasonably quickly. But at university, I fell in love deeply with history. And the history of our own culture since the Reformation is that at every point we want to tear away from faith, thinking that somehow or other we can do it better on our own. That's human nature. And when you see it playing out in history, the thing that really, really struck me was that this is very crude and very simple, but the left-wing solution to the need to get rid of God was communism, and the right wing was fascism, and both were horrendous. Horrendous. and patently, obviously to me, bad and not places I wanted to go to. And so there was a process where the mind, I suppose, joined the heart and put the two together. And I thought, well, I can't not believe.
Yeah. It's an interesting story, John, because a lot of people end up growing up as teenagers at church with faith, go to university and lose faith. In this instant, it actually deepened faith for you.
It did. We had a very, very intellectually honest late modern European lecturer. His name from memory was Bob Dreyer. He'd been to Vietnam. Now, he didn't believe himself, but he made it very plain that he struggled with the question, that it was an honest struggle, and that we shouldn't think we could escape the need to come to grips with that reality as well. Because in a sense, history is the study of ideas and how they played out. And he brought us to a point where he said, well, you're at a fork in the road, you know, and you've got to decide whether you're going to try and find another way to escape these belief systems or whether you're going to go back and embrace them and just think long and hard about where we've ended up as we tried to deny them. And that's, our universities are full of people now trying to deny it. And I would say they are visiting great misery on a lot of their students. The amazing thing is that I meet students everywhere who say, no one in our tutorial stroke lecture group stroke whatever, you know, fails to recognising we'll have a whole lot of ideology pushed down our throats. They see it. I just hope and pray that a lot of them start to understand it a little more, question a bit more, look for better answers. Because if they can sense they're being sold a pup, a dud, well, go and look for the real thing.
Yeah. So, John, you were going through universities in the sort of 70s and 80s. You're struggling with belief, but it's also a time of social ferment and enormous change in people's morals and the moral stance. And it seems to me a lot of people didn't grapple with the intellectual problem because actually they were actually experimenting with the moral issues. How was that for you?
Tough, frankly, because I suppose morally I wanted to go with the flow. It's so much more comfortable.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're young, you don't understand that the pursuit of pleasure is very different from the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of pleasure often forecloses the opportunity to find happiness, because happiness in the end is found in deep and committed relationships for a start. And pleasure often consists in simply, you know, to be really crude about it, somebody saying, lend me your body so that I can satisfy mine, and it's done without relationship. It's sans relationship. And in the end, everybody ends up just being a bit degraded over time. Relationships are the key, surely, and deep commitment in relationships is the oil that makes them work.
Yeah.
And I struggled a lot with that. Yeah. And I think I probably made a lot of terrible mistakes. But you know, I hope I found at least the sort of general direction in which integrity and truth lie.
We're on the farm, and you spent a lot of time as a farmer, and you're a farmer now. What's it like being a farmer?
Frustrating, frankly. You've got to have a love for it, and you've got to have the temperament. You've got to be able to put things down and accept the disappointments that come. The utter frustration of not knowing how to handle a drought. Do I sell livestock? Do I feed livestock? Do I spend a fortune on them? Or do I sell them? Do I then try and buy back in? How many more crop losses can I survive before, you know, the bank sort of becomes involved, or whatever it happens to be? It is a stressful occupation, and it always has been, because you're dealing with so many unknowns. Yeah. Most businesses you're dealing with some unknowns, but in this one, it's prices, it's seasons, it's everything.
So why stay with it?
Because I think for a lot of people it's a vocation, and I think people do. They have a love of the land. You stop and think about who are the real sheep, the ones that live in the city or the country. And I notice that most of the sheep in the city, if they get the opportunity, they want to go and buy a bit of dirt. Somehow it's deep in our psyche for a lot of people.
Is it a business or a passion?
It has to be both. I used to have that discussion. I don't think he'd mind me saying it with Peter Costello. I'd say, you know, you farmers, you've got to treat it like a business. And I said, if we all treated it like a business, mate, you wouldn't be eating. You know, it has to be a sense of vocation as well.
Yeah.
Because as a business, we'd be far better off. You flog the land and go and invest it and live comfortably ever after. Because the capital value of any sort of quality farm at all bears, the earning capacity bears no relationship to that capital value.
What value does the agricultural business make to Australia's economy?
Well, it depends how you slice and dice it, really. I mean, if you say straight agriculture, it probably only employs 2% of the workforce, whereas, say, when my forebears came out here, it would have been 50 or 60%. That's mechanisation, it's science, it's all sorts of things. Look at it another way, it's probably only 3% of GDP, but on the other hand, if you sort of take into account the multipliers, the food processing, grocery distribution, restauranteering and so forth, it's a far greater part of the economy. But I'd submit in the end, it's a part of the economy that no matter its size, without it, none of us would be doing anything else. We have to eat.
So, John, you come to this role as a Christian. Being a farmer, running a business as someone who seeks to follow Jesus, does that influence how you are a farmer?
Do you know, I think I'm going to say in defence of most farmers that the key thing that I think is important in a farmer's mind from a faith perspective should be stewardship over the land. You're looking after it for future generations, not just for yourself. And I think this is often misunderstood. Most farmers care passionately about their land and are always looking forward, looking for better ways to ensure that what they're doing is as sustainable as possible, they're having the least impact in terms of soil erosion, in terms of soil degradation and what have you. And we continue to make advances. And one of the great ironies in the great emissions debate going on at the moment is that farmers, unlike all you city folk who just put out all those dirty emissions, we are users of carbon, but we're recyclers of it. We're users of it as well. And we only have to retain quite modest amounts of extra carbon in the soil, and we can sequestrate a great deal of what other activities people are engaging in are producing. And I think we're only just beginning to understand how extensive the opportunities there actually are. And here's an irony. More carbon in the soil means more drought resistance and higher quality, denser foodstuffs. So we keep learning. And agriculture has changed hugely over my lifetime. In some ways, the biggest change in grazing was the development of cheap, affordable polythene piping so that you could take water much more widely and distribute it to where you needed it, so the cattle didn't flog the areas around the water hole. You could take the water out to where you wanted them to move to, and we've got better and better at that. If you take farming, increasingly we're getting towards the point now where our tractors are, I think the jargon today in a motor car would be semi-automated. You've got to turn it around at the end, but the tractors are, all run on GPS coordinates, and I think there are 6 screens in our main broadacre tractor. So this is not low technology. It's not an area where science is unimportant, far from it. And one Australian farmer feeds, it's estimated, 600 people. I don't think farmers anywhere in the world can match that, and we do it in a tough environment.